So welcome again. Sorry, I hope that woke everyone up a bit. But yes, we'll get started with our first panel discussion. I will let Frank introduce the panelists quickly. I will introduce Frank quickly. Well, I think we all met him, who I learned his official title is Virginia's husband, but on the side is a professor of computer science at Mondai University. So this is our hybrid session. Just to say again, we're very happy and fortunate to have a few people joining us virtually. As everyone knows, this is a young network with the ambitions to have a global reach and a global outlook. So I think one of the things that we will be thinking about and discussing is how to truly make this a global network. Now we can think about some entrenched funding or otherwise moving forward to bring different people together from around the globe. But we are very fortunate today that we can at least do this virtually and have a hybrid session this morning. So I think I will leave it there. Oh wait, no, I had one other thing. In case anyone is wondering about Wi-Fi, I forgot to mention this in the housekeeping. So EduRoam does not work so well here, but the Yes Delft guest account is open and the best option for you in case you're looking for an internet connection and have not found one yet. But with that, I will hand it over to Frank and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks. Maybe introduction would be good because I'm sitting now, so you don't recognize me so easily anymore. They asked me to be moderator of this panel, and I said, okay, I'll gladly do that. And only later on, they told me, 3 out of the 4 members are online. Actually, 1 cannot be here at all. So it's quite of a challenge to make this a little bit interactive. So we'll see how we go, and hopefully we have a lot of interaction with the room and with the people online through chat. 4 speakers in the panel. Actually, the one present, Ayatollah, he will be the last one speaking because we think it's easier to have the online people first. And actually, the first one, you will only see a video, Kim van Sparatak. She's member of the European Parliament, so that makes it, of course, very interesting because of the AI Act being kind of postponed and what's happening there and how what's the politics at this moment. And then we have Carolina from Uruguay, which is nice to hear something.
I'm forwarding her hi.
Oh, hi. Yeah, we don't see Carolina. We don't see you. We only see the PowerPoint slide.
I was waving. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, and then we have Ed Choi. I hope he's online as well. Yeah, good.
Yep. Hi. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. So they will come first, and then Ayatollah will finish it off before we go to the room. So I gave all four people, but Kim, hopefully she responds in the video to this, a number of questions about the topic of safety and sovereignty, and especially about whether we should have regional different kind of perspectives on that. So let's see what Kim responded to in her video. I don't know if I have to do anything here. Do you set off the video?
Hello everyone, my name is Kim van Sparatak. I'm a member of the European Parliament, and I really want to thank you for inviting me to join you at your summit to discuss the future of artificial intelligence and what kind of safeguards we can have to make sure that the implementation of artificial intelligence happens in a way that is good for people, planets, democracies, basically that it can actually further our societies rather than make a few people very rich, which is the direction we are going right now. Unfortunately, I can't be there because I have votes today, or I think actually at the moment that you're seeing this video, which of course is very important to be at. So unfortunately, I can't make it. However, it is a very timely moment to be discussing the safeguards for artificial intelligence. Because next week the European Commission will tell us how we will become more competitive by reducing legislation. And I'm still not sure how they want to make sure that actually is a workable thing in the field of artificial intelligence. Because if you look at the way that AI is currently being presented to our societies, it's a few big tech companies that are mainly driving the economy and are also doing a lot of work and efforts to make sure that they consolidate that power. And one of the things that they really, really dislike is the fact that we have legislation, which means they can't just steal all the data they want, just push several types of systems onto the market without having done some checks whether they're safe or not. The European Commission is ready to give in to these complaints, to say, okay, we can reopen the general data protection regulation because it's really great that we in the European Union have privacy and that's an important value to us, and we try to make sure that you can't just steal every person's data to make profit with. But of course, it's really annoying for you, Meta. We know you want to use all the data that you have on Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and use it for AI. So, okay, we will open the GDPR and say that, you can now use it. It's a legitimate interest. Same as stealing all our data to push ads at us, Great, let's do that. And we already have seen in several other attempts to lower bureaucracy or reduce rules in the EU by deregulating, that if you propose a few things to be scrapped in laws, after it comes out of the European Parliament and the Council in the current political climate, more and more will be slashed out. So I'm not very hopeful that these are the only things, and the things that they are probably going to propose are already pretty bad for our fundamental rights. And the other law that they are looking at to reopen is the Artificial Intelligence Act, and that is, I guess, even more close to my heart. Not because I find it more important, but because I worked on it. I was the shadow rapporteur on the Artificial Intelligence Act. I worked for hours and hours on making sure that the big tech lobby didn't get away with, some empty law that wouldn't mean anything. That governments are held to certain standards when implementing artificial intelligence, and that they just can't just offload responsibilities to systems. Also here, the European Commission has found a reason to listen to Trump and his big tech brothers, and to say no. Okay, let's reopen the AI Act. In principle, for some targeted amendments to make sure that small and medium businesses and also small mid caps, have it a bit more easy to change a few of the dates that are not that easy to reach, and that's it. But we're already seeing that member states and business unions are getting ready. They're ready to get rid of the fundamental rights impact assessment, something that's actually inspired by one of the biggest scandals in the Netherlands that still hasn't been solved, namely the child benefit scandal, where the Dutch government said, oh yeah, let's use an algorithm to see whether people are fraudsters. Well, if you ask an algorithm to point out fraudsters and you don't test that algorithm properly, the algorithm will find fraudsters. And because no one in the government felt the agency to have a proper check, because the algorithm will probably know better than a human, they came up with the idea of making sure that you can do a fundamental rights impact assessment to see whether you can be discriminated by an algorithm. Well, this is one of the things that is already on the wish list of several member states to slash, because, oh, how annoying that we have to check on fundamental rights. Another thing is something I fought for really hard is checking on the sustainability, the impact on nature and climate. of these systems, making sure that at least we have transparency on that. This is also one of the things that is on the wish list of being scrapped. I'm quite concerned because besides the things that are seen as annoying bureaucracy, which is the fundamental rights impact assessment and the sustainability transparency, of course, there's also some member states like Hungary who are already realizing, oh, the Artificial Intelligence Act actually hampers me in using mass surveillance during prides. And next to that, the tech lobby has just upped their funding for lobby in the EU from 100 million a year to 150 million a year. They are ready to kill our laws, and we are still ready. Me and my group and all the progressive in the parliament are still ready to fight against this. We're still fighting to make the European Commission change their minds to not fall for Trump and his tech bros, and make sure that they don't reopen the acts. And if they do, we will do everything we can to make sure that in the EU we will still have safe artificial intelligence. Because even if you really think about it, how is like opening up these laws and basically rolling out the red carpet for big tech companies to, guzzle up all our data and consolidate the market power they already have? How is it going to help our European businesses? For me, it's very unclear. It's a very disappointing bow down to Trump and his tech bros, and I really, really hope that the Commission will still get some sense. Also, to hear more input from your side on how we make sure that we go further with artificial intelligence that can be beneficial for society, but without having negative impacts, such as the horrible things we're already seeing. When we were writing the AI Act, we were still in a space where a lot of the things that we were considering as were potential harms. Right now, we see the harms in real life. We see kids being recommended to self-harm or worse. We are seeing forms of discrimination that are growing. We see the huge impact that deepfakes and the ease of making, for example, deep nudes have on our societies. We need safeguards with this new technology. And that's why I'm very happy that you are talking about this today. I'm very curious to hear your outcomes, and I hope you will have a lovely conference, and sorry again for not being able to be
there. I just thought now maybe it's good to see if anyone wants to react on this right away, because Kim will not be here and then we kind of forget this part. So, Virginia.
Of course, I agree with a lot of what Kim says. Yes, for the video. Yeah, I agree with a lot what Kim says and does. I have worked with Kim for quite some time. But one of the things which I think that it's very concrete work for us as people working on AI policy research is the impact of what she's explaining. If the AI Act is going to soften a lot of their clauses, the work to do that lays on the organizations that are buying or implementing the AI products. I'm clear in a concrete example. I'm working with the European Network of National Employment Organizations, the UWV in the Netherlands and whatever else in other countries. They buy or they use a lot of external AI for job matching, for classification of priority into subsidies and so on. If those tools don't come with the guarantees that the AI Act would do, they have to do the work. They have to guarantee that they check all these issues around human rights impact assessment, about the quality of the systems, about all those things. So it's not just a matter of softening it for the tech bros or claiming that it's for the European SMEs, but it's coming also with a lot of work on the receiving side, or let's say on the using side of the AI algorithms and tools. And that, I think, is something that we as researchers in the field can very clearly and very fundamentally demonstrate. Look, there is a side, another side to it. It's not just slackening the AI Act. If we slacken it in one side, it comes with effort in the other side. And this effort needs to be done by someone. And then it's not a European globally thing, but now then every employment agency in Europe will need to do that individually. So all that work is something that we can show that is the consequences and the cost of slackening things like AI Act and other policies. So I just want to give that example as some very concrete issues that we can work as a group, or that we can push for more research to show the costs of taking away regulation.
Rule.
Yeah, maybe to underline that even further, I think it's naive for us to look at the AI Act and hope it will solve a lot of problems. Like, this work was always necessary. And actually, if you take a even more cynical perspective on the influence from the big tech firms, is that they also captured the standards development. There's some really good journalistic investigations that show that even though standard development was a multi-actor, multi-stakeholder process, in the end, organizations sort of holding the pen and having a lot of influence were the larger tech companies, and Microsoft was even representing multiple EU member states, in this standard development. And so, to make that concrete, you have Dutch SMEs, again, this economic argument, like small AI in healthcare startups and scale-ups, that were trying to influence these standard developments for AI in healthcare, and they had a really hard time. And so I think the point Kim is making, I don't see how this is helping European business, is really an important point. And what they also told me is that there were no doctors and no patients at the table. Right, so, I mean, I think we have to start from scratch, but then also really see, okay, what are the other kinds of questions we as researchers can, other than pushing the new technological developments, or what are the kind of institutional economic innovations or ways of working that can, help grow a new forest of AI tools or digital innovations that, in absence of, I think, a meaningful standard and a regulatory framework for the future, and hopefully that can then inform updating the AI Act over time. But I think we really need to go to our economic affairs ministries and ask for for the subsidies and the investments in multi-stakeholder efforts like this, because they really missed the boat there. They thought that those standards might just appear out of thin air, but obviously we got something else.
Any other? Yeah.
I mean, I think mine is more of a question, but I feel like to be able to talk about the impact on industries or business, you kind of need a baseline. And some businesses automatically have a baseline because they already have metrics in place, like in telecoms or whatever. And there are maybe some things that you can measure, and then there are other industries or vulnerable groups that don't have data, don't have baselines, and maybe a multi-stakeholder process can capture some of that. But especially when we're looking at the impact of policy, or we're looking at the impact of different interventions, I think it's also interesting to start to look at, what kind of tools or standardization could facilitate a process of establishing baselines in different communities in a way that serves the community and not, let's say, further model training or something like that.
Elma, are there any online things? No? Good, I think. So then let's continue. I'm trying to take it as a moderator not to say too much. I have a lot of things I would like to. But I will first let the panel speak. So the next one, I would like to invite Carolina to share her slides. Just for Carolina, we will not see you on screen. We will just see your PowerPoint when you share it.
Okay, thank you. So I didn't prepare a slide. I mean, I did fill in some slides about myself and the work, etc., but not about the presentation, since I was thinking it was going to be a bit more kind of, we're going to discuss this a little bit more in a roundtable fashion. So I will be quick so as not to bore you, and would love to hear some kind of reactions to some of the comments to your excellent questions, Frank, that you posed for us initially. So in terms of what are the general trends around AI safety as a regulatory issue, and particularly in Latin America, I would like to point out that there was a very significant effort by the last year of the Biden administration in the region concerning several governments to look at AI safety, and I think this is very important for you and many of you who come from Europe to understand kind of this effort, this soft power approach of the incipient AI Safety Institute in the NIST. And there were many MOUs that were signed during 2023 and 2024. And many of these countries, Uruguay included, so we have now an MOU with some kind of non-existent entity, but I think that is very, very special, because at the same time when the EU AI Act was being promoted and discussed, and many of the countries in Latin America, there's around 8 who are having strong parliamentary discussions to address AI as a broad encompassing technology that should have a comprehensive regulation. We were having these discussions in the region, governments, the executive branches, most of them, or digital government agencies, with the AI Safety Institute. And these MOUs were signed or were kind of approached. And so when we have this kind of trend, when we map safety discussions around AI globally, and we look at Bletchley, then we at Korea, and then Paris, and how the change shifted, particularly because of the change in government in the United States. The impact that this had in Latin America, of course, was relevant, was strong, but there were foundations. So there had been this kind of this Brussels effect discussion, and looking at whether the risk-based approach of the initial discussions of the EU AI Act since 2021, and also these approaches by the AI Safety Institute at the NIST in the region. So now, where do we stand in terms of AI safety in Latin America? And I mean, of course, every country works in a different way, and there's different speeds and approaches in the way this is being addressed. The region doesn't work as a political region as such, so you have as many policy approaches as national jurisdictions. But if we have to sort of paint a broad sketch of how this is being included, so there is, on the one hand, all of the national bills that are being currently discussed in Parliament, and even the Peruvian AI law, which has been passed late in 2023 and has been regulated this year. There is a risk-based approach in these laws, and the bills are containing some safety provisions, but which are also framed from a risk-based approach. So how do we see this actually being kind of implemented, and what is the role that a lot of civil society perspectives have included in the discussion around AI regulation, which are relevant for a safety discussion as a governance approach to AI. So firstly, I mean, there is the issue of how countries have embraced their own data protection approaches, and this was mentioned earlier in the first presentation. So it is worth bearing in mind that most of the countries in the region now have relatively comprehensive and robust general data protection frameworks, including the Brazilian one, but Argentina and Uruguay, for example, have their own general data protection laws that are compatible with the GDPR. Secondly, there is and there has been an increased appetite during the what I would call the kind of the first wave of interest by national governments to participate in AI governance, and this was materialized in national AI strategies in many countries. There is a trend to sort of provide some auditing to how algorithm transparency and the purchase of algorithmic services that are used in government. So regulating AI systems used in government is already something that is on the table or that is being actively pursued by the purchase and procurement offices in some countries. Particularly in Chile, this has been a very innovative country in that respect. Then there are significant concerns in terms of the use of and how AI safety provisions could participate in shaping specific discussions around the use of algorithmic systems in facial recognition and for crime and prevention and used by law enforcement agencies. And this is very relevant, and I think it's a very topical discussion like in a region with a kind of violence and crime and insecurity in general that unfortunately sort of is very stereotypical of Latin America, but it's also kind of a crude reality. So the appetite for law enforcement agencies to use these kind of systems is on the margins of what any of the bills is contemporarily being addressed or discussed. So these systems are being used in public transport, for example, in some public spaces, in squares, etc. And they fall, I mean, in this gray area where it is not completely regulated, and there is push to address these issues in the region. I will stop for now so as not to bore you with my online discussion, but I'm very happy to continue with the discussion later.
Okay, thanks. Are there any immediate reactions or questions on this before we continue? No? Okay, then we first continue with Ed's contribution. And let's see, we can get Ed online.
Right. Hi, Frank. Quick question. Would you like me to touch on all 4 questions at this stage, or shall I focus on the first one for now?
Yeah.
That's a great question, Ed. I took for granted that it was me. I had to address the first one only now in my first intervention.
Yeah. So you got your answer at the first one.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to follow the format and then dive into the other questions later on as well.
By the way, we got 4 questions just for the people here in the room.
Yeah, so a bit of a quick question. I mean, I can already see some familiar faces from last year as well. Hello, everyone. For those that we haven't met, my name is Edward Choi. I'm the co-founder of AI Safety Asia, a nonprofit that focuses on AI governance and safety issues in Asia. So we do training focusing on senior government officials and also CSO, especially in Southeast Asia. We do research and also we do convening. And then when I look at the AI safety question posed by Frank and also the context set out by Carolina, I think what I'll do is maybe I will take a step back and try to cover some of the context of this term AI safety, right? I mean, for many of the people in the room, they might already have that context. But of course, when people, no matter working in AI governance, AI ethics, or AI safety field, they might see this term as somewhat politically loaded. It usually suggests a few things. When people look at AI safety, it usually suggests mostly focusing on the technical side of things, technical safety. And this term is also quite strongly associated with some of the people that are especially concerned with existential risks, catastrophic risks, or frontier risks. And this term can be quite tribal in nature, especially in the West. We're not seeing necessarily the same tribal division in Asia, because these fields, no matter whether you're looking at AI safety, AI governance, AI ethics, responsible AI, it's quite nascent. So this field is very new, so there's not really that tribal tension in Asia. But our approach is that we're trying to take a more broader view when we engage with senior government officials. We're trying to introduce the full spectrum of risks to the senior government officials that we notice. So all the things from the societal risk side of things, so bias, privacy, discrimination, the possibilities of surveillance, all the way to some of these catastrophic risks that we are quite concerned about. So for example, alignment, loss of control, manipulation, deception, these kind of topics. I think when I approach this question, is AI safety a regulatory issue? What I would do is I would try to push the envelope a little bit. I would say that AI safety is a governance issue, but regulation is just a part of governance. And I would probably highlight one of the case study by the Singaporean government, which is quite interesting. I mean, they are essentially taking a hybrid approach. They don't have anything overarching like the AI Act in the EU, but instead at the hard law regulatory level, they have been pushing for sectorial regulation. So for example, they have regulation focusing on the disinformation material during election campaign. So it's temporary and also very specific, and it's also technology agnostic, meaning they don't really care whether you actually use AI or what kind of AI to generate this info. As long as you have done that, then you're screwed. And instead of a risk-based approach, they're taking a harm-based approach, meaning as long as harm hasn't happened, you would be okay. But then that's not the only thing that they're trying to do in terms of governance. In terms of some of these frontier risk conversation, they're also quite active in the international network of AI Safety Institute. They have their own AC in Singapore, but instead of taking the approach that some of the other AC, for example, the UK AC is taking, which is very much focused on frontier risks, as you can see in their international scientific report on AI safety, chaired by Professor Yoshua Bengio. The Singaporean AC is focusing at the intersection between AI safety and private adoption. So for example, if you look at the work that they've done in conjunction with their sister body, like the AI Wi-Fi Foundation, it's very much focused on the questions of AI assurance, AI auditing. How can we utilize some of these science of AI safety to help the private sector to adopt some of these AI-powered solution in a very safe way? So that's kind of their focus, but it's not necessarily the only one. So that's also why we have done a research reports together with Brookings Institute, looking at kind of the trend at the Southeast Asia level in terms of AI governance. If I can share my screen, I can also share quickly about that report. And then besides the regional report that we've done with Brookings, another interesting thing of the first question is looking at the regional difference, right? Is there a need or is it important to have such regional differences when we look at AI safety? The thing that I'll focus on is potentially evaluation. Right now, evaluation is kind of a very loose term, and there's different version of interpretation. And also when you look at some of these more mainstream evaluation efforts, very often they tend to focus on the direct output level of some of these models, meaning they'll be looking at, all right, let's ask the chatbot some questions and then look at the direct output in terms of the answer and try to measure the accuracy, the toxicity, or some other form of bias. But then what's missing right now is to also look at the interaction between the model and also the human user. So that's kind of the first order impact. And then besides that, it's also very important to look at the potential second order impact on the society. So I think some of the previous speakers have mentioned some of the concern, especially with regards to the interaction between chatbot and teenager user, as we can see from cases like Carousel.ai or some of the ongoing lawsuits against OpenAI. Right now, many of these evaluation efforts doesn't really capture the potential first order impact with real human user, and also some of these potential impacts on a societal level in terms of second order. So I think there's a lot of regional differences as we expand to these kind of first order and eventually second order impact evaluation. And if we don't have robust ecosystem in different parts of the world to try to uncover some of these concerns, then potentially we might have some blind spots in terms of vulnerabilities and some of these safety questions as well. So I'm going to leave it at that and pass it to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks. Any direct reactions on this? Virginia.
Thank you, Ed, for your intervention. Also, Carolina, by the way. Just to confirm again and trying to push the agenda of why we need policy research. Recently, and as Ed also talks about, Ed refers to the issues of how Asia is so pragmatic and so less based on regulation as a form of governance, but trying to take a pragmatic approach. We saw that also in a meeting where both Ed and me were recently on AI and human rights. And again, here I think that pushing the agenda of AI policy research is exactly because of this pragmatic approach. Like you say, if no harm happens, then we are still okay, and we wait for harms to happen, and then we see what might happen or not, which is a position that maybe not so informal like this, but we see happening in lots of Asian countries. And again, here the need for evidence on policy and on the effects of policy or the effects of non-policy, it's crucial for these positions and these directions that many of the Asian countries are taking. Let's be pragmatic, let's be keeping all options open, really requires, again, the research and the evidence that we can provide on AI, what happens when we do policy and what happens when we have no policy around. So just to use your words to stress the importance for what we can do in this group.
A quick reaction, if I may. I think the pragmatism that we're seeing in countries like Singapore also have to do with their realistic calculation in terms of their bargaining power. I mean, comparing Singapore to the EU, it's not really a comparison. I mean, Singapore is a tiny country with very little market power compared to the European Union. So the bargaining power is much more limited in comparison. And that's the same situation faced by many, even middle power countries like the UK, for example. I mean, well, they've gone out of the European Union, so who's to blame? But then what I'm trying to say is also not to suggest, oh, we should just deregulate per se, but trying to push the discussion a little bit broader in terms of also considering what other stack or what other layers or components of governance we could also consider besides hard regulation, or I think many people do agree that we need some sort of baseline hard regulation. But besides of that, how do we close the gap to make it easier for no matter private sector or for the public sector to comply with such regulation? So, for example, another example that I will point to is also Singapore. I'm from Hong Kong, by the way, in case there's any ambiguity. Is that they have also launched something called the AI Wi-Fi Foundation, trying to create the ecosystem around AI assurance, trying to create more startup, for-profit startup, to focus on offering AI safety commercial solution to either private companies or to public sector, so that if, for example, if there's a policy pressure pushing these companies to comply, or for some reason they actually care about safety governance, there's an option for them to simply get a readily made solution from the commercial market to help them to comply at least some of these expectation or regulation.
Thank you so much. Also, just trying to break the who's talking kind of direction. I think let's get it out in the group. Hi, Ed. I'm Duke Baten from the Netherlands. I really like your points and positions so far, and especially this element of trying to find out maybe where and which kind of policy making will help and work. Right. So. I'm a fan of the regulation we're trying to do in Europe. I'm also concerned, like Kim just told, about the changes that might be happening there. But they also bring a lot of challenges for different organizations, and that's one of the themes of the panel. Is also sovereignty. We're also talking about how do different nation states or areas promote their own building of these systems, maybe in the future, either by public parties, public government parties, or by private parties. How can we maybe separate almost in this policy research agenda questions which parts of policy making and which kinds of policy work are productive in which kinds of places of the AI product development life cycle, right? So some parts are very much regulatory, but we can also influence the development processes. I think there's a big opportunity in the procurement processes. So how do we do the procurement of systems? Is that something you also see happening in your neck of the woods, so to say?
Yeah, I will also touch on the second question briefly. I mean, since we are touching on sovereignty as well. I mean, sovereignty again is a very loose term, especially in the context of AI, right? Depends on who's saying that word. If it's Jensen Huang, then it's most likely saying that you should consider buying more NVIDIA chips. If it's Sam Altman, then it's probably asking you to consider spending some money to build another Stargate project in your country. But right now, many of these countries, especially countries as middle power or in the global majority context, many of them, they kind of perceive the AI sovereignty question as kind of a binary choice right now. And to take a step back, I mean, many of these country leaders, they recognize that AI is a very important and sexy topic for their people. So what we have seen in Southeast Asia, for example, if you look at the 11 ASEAN countries, more than half of them have published their national AI strategy and also their national AI roadmap. But then what we've seen is usually these kind of national high-level documents is very empty-worded and sometimes very slogan-like. So for example, in the Philippines, they have technically published the National AI Strategy 1.0 and also the National AI Strategy 2.0. But apparently no one have ever seen the full text of the National AI Strategy 1.0. So there's a little bit of nationalistic and slogan-like scenario there. But then for those actively thinking about this kind of sovereignty question, very often they're seeing the choice being a binary option. Either I go with the US, getting the US chips, and then leaning on the US, let's say, foundational model, or I go with the Chinese. And the interesting thing in Southeast Asia right now is many countries, not just in Southeast Asia, but especially in the region, they're trying to be somewhat politically neutral between the two major power for as long as they can without picking a side. So many countries actually have a hybrid investment approach, considering both the US tech stack, but also the Chinese tech stack. And we're also seeing some of the other, especially the more well-resourced countries. So for example, Switzerland, they have published their own foundation model, which is completely open weight, and also open data sets, if I recall correctly. Singapore has another attempt, a project, what they called Sea Lion, trying to build on top of some of the major languages from Southeast Asia. So there are different attempts to different degree, but what we are also trying to see is how can we push that sovereignty question with more options. I was in another talk just now given by the CTO of UKAC, Jake Leung, who just became the new national advisor to the UK Prime Minister on AI. And what's interesting is the UK interpretation of AI sovereignty focused very much on access. So no matter whether you're talking about the hardware infrastructure or some of these foundational model, the key question is, can the UK access different options in different stack, no matter now or in a few years' time? So that's how they kind of perceive the whole sovereignty question.
Thanks. I want to continue now with Ayatollah. I don't know if you want to stand here to show you.
I could just sit. Fine. Sit.
But so I have to probably do the slides here.
Yeah. Okay. Just to say, I think Frank has given me like two hard jobs today. The first one is being the last speaker. It's very hard to kind of say interesting things when everyone said all that's there to be said. I think the second hard job is to sort of compress everything into 15 minutes and 3 slides. I hope I've been able to do that. But yeah, just very quickly, kind of unpacking some of the issues. It's I had a hard time kind of distilling what sort of conversation go into safety, sovereignty. These are entirely 2 different topics, actually. Very hard to kind of be able to bring them together, but I'll try my best. So talking about, I think starting point, talking about safety, right? Which is sort of the, I guess the agenda to ensure that AI systems align and they behave reliably as they are designed, sort of, not producing unintended harms, right? Versus sovereignty, which is, I think Ed has been talking about this sort of push to control your digital future, data systems, infrastructure, whichever way you want to define it, without external control, sort of aligning with national interest. Now, in some ways, as somebody who works in sovereignty, right, the conversation on sovereignty today has sort of shifted towards sort of geopolitical competition. It's not so much about national values anymore. There's sort of a bifurcation between like US and Chinese tech suppliers, which is what I'm actually doing my PhD on now. So how do these two relate when we talk about, I guess, regional perspectives or the global majority? I think the main issue is that AI safety has to go beyond the sort of technical way we view it now, developing benchmarks and standards, alignment using, reinforcement learning and all of this stuff, to a holistic assessment, right? Especially in places like Africa, where I think the lines tend to be blurred. I mean, the focus of AI safety obviously is on the outcomes of the systems themselves, right? Which is, okay, how do you ensure that, the systems don't cause, I guess, collateral damage in the short term, or in the long term that we lose control of this AI tool, right? But it goes beyond that, really, to the existing social and economic systems within which artificial intelligence is plugged, right? And I'll give a few examples actually to sort of corroborate this. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you shift AI safety from a technical perspective to a sort of more broader socio-economic perspective, you're able to see the link between safety and sovereignty. Now, the other challenge is to then say, well, if everything is safety, what's the difference between AI safety and ethics, right? I mean, the fundamental difference is obviously with AI safety, you're focusing on the outcomes of systems to ensure that systems behave the way they're designed to. ethics is obviously more structural, right? You want to ensure that these systems are designed in a way that I guess is normatively desirable, right? But again, if you take everything as a sort of there's an end goal, which is that not only that AI behaves in certain ways, but that AI serves everyone, equitably, you're able to see the link. And I have two stories I think I can use to corroborate this. The first one is, so there's a startup in Ghana called Mino Health. Sorry, I'm going off my slide now. I'm going to come back to it.
Just tell me when I need to put the next slide.
And that's fine. So there's a startup in Ghana called Mino Health AI Labs, which basically develops genetic modeling for biology, right? And it's been a very efficient model, actually. It's built primarily on open source systems. Some of it also involves primary data collection in the Ghanaian context. And initially, when they started out, this was a very, I guess by benchmarks and testing, this is a model that performs very well, actually. Just a quote from a paper that reports on the model says, the model has not failed in new protein or compound design towards any target it was given. So basically, we all know about using AI for drug discovery and things like that. So they tested this model on several de novo protein mechanisms, and it was performance was really good. But then one other thing they decided to do is hold on a minute. If everyone has access to this model, right? Basically, it's open source. It also means that if it's this efficient, you can use it to generate a potential, new toxins, basically. So the authors came together and tried to jailbreak their own system, basically. So sort of the typical thing you would do when you're trying to test the system, put in prompts without the guardrails. And yes, the model did indeed generate, so according to the study, over 1,000 novel toxic protein, right? And this was analyzed. And they contain very high toxicity, actually, than the traditional ones you would see. So this is sort of the kind of example you would find. Now, bear in mind, this is a system that's, it's developed in Africa, right? There's always the perspective that, risks are sort of regionally stratified, right? But anyone could have access to this model from anywhere in the world, right? And the harms are kind of spread out, even if the model is based in somewhere in Ghana, right? The second example is, I don't know if anyone has heard of something called Undress AI. Anyone in the room? Okay. So Undress AI basically is, it's actually a US-based company. If you can call it a company, US-based app that generates AI nudes. It's very interesting how normalized this sort of perspective has become today. So earlier this year, a Nigerian female celebrity put a picture of herself up on, I think on Twitter somewhere. A few hours after, she came online and found that, the image has been used to, the picture has been used to generate several nudes of her, just being naked, and also a sex tape, right? And obviously this went on for weeks, and she kept, obviously defending herself to say, well, this is not me. How can my sex tape be out there? And well, it turns out that some people picked it up randomly and just plug it in. And it's actually, some of these tools are open access, really. You can just take anyone's picture, plug it in, and generate a nude of them. As you can imagine, it's mostly women and girls who are, victims of this. And that tells a powerful story. One of which is a lot of these perpetrators are actually not based in country. So I spoke to a Nigerian journalist who was working on an investigation on this 2 weeks ago, and he found a lot of these websites and the people who actually operate them are not based in countries. Some of them are based in Taiwan, in Singapore, with companies registered in the US. And obviously, they try to mask some of this under the caveat that, well, it's if you use this AI tool, you use it on your own, right? We don't encourage this, but but really it begs the question, right? If companies can just put a small caveat up to say, well, if you use it, we're not liable to any damage or whatever. How exactly are we regulating AI tools? Because a lot of these tools are actually built on open source models, right? Models that are, the models that we know, not to name anyone. So they are trackable, right? You can shut them down if you want to, but nobody really cares about this. So if you think about AI safety or sort of preventing these sort of harms in this context, we can see how it relates to sovereignty, which is that countries with certain types of values, right? So if you, again, I always refer to the process of the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI. A couple of the countries during that process did oppose the use or the framing, of certain words, right? And that goes back to, their views, for example, on gender and religion and things like that, right? But if we want to build a system that's, I guess, is globally cooperative, that protects everyone everywhere in the world, some ideas of sovereignty actually have to be stemmed down in a way. It's my proposal is very antithetical, and I guess I'll be able to defend it as I move on. So why is this important? Ed has talked about it a little bit. There's a shift from safety to security, right? The UK's AI Safety Institute has been renamed AI Security Institute now. The US, the same. Actually, I think the US is potentially shutting down NIST, which used to host the AI Safety Institute. The International Network on AI Safety Institute has not really made any progress since it was established last year in Seoul. There's actually a need for us to bring back this conversation because governments are not really interested in them as they were in the past. Now, so what's the difference, safety and security? It's sort of the shift from focus on, unintentional design faults, right? So things like privacy bias, or whether intentional or unintentional, that comes from the design, to adversarial attacks, which is very high level probability that, for example, a country or humanity would be attacked by somebody who is a malicious actor, right? Now, and there are differences. There's a political undertone here, which is that everyday short-term harms are not prioritized, right? And this kind of, utopian or dystopian future of AI wiping everyone out. And there are two camps, so it's a very political thing, actually. So you have the short-term people who are like, no, AI is not necessarily going to wipe everyone out. So last year, Geoffrey Hinton, said, well, the chances that this would happen, that AI would wipe everyone out, is about 10 to 20%. So it's really small. And you have the people who are kind of focusing, the FHIs, EAs of this world, are saying, well, we have to consider the long-term existential risk. People like, Nick Bostrom. So this sort of shift shows you the geopolitical atmosphere around it. I think I've talked about international agreements. Obviously, the private sector is scaling down international safety measures in favor of commercial capabilities. I remember talking to a friend in one of the big techs, not to name, and so he was telling me how obviously policy enforcement teams have been disbanded, but there's also like a reduction in the scale and threshold of what actually constitutes, for example, gender harassment. So if you lower the threshold, what would normally be censored doesn't get censored anymore. But let's come to the African context, actually. On a state level, there's limited intervention in AI safety. So I guess let me start from the other way around. So if you look at the African Union AI strategy, and also I think currently there are about 13 countries in Africa that have national AI strategies. None really covers, I guess, at least comprehensively, anything on safety, right? There's a paper that's actually coming out by a colleague of mine in technology and regulation, and they sort of analyze all of these strategies, and what they found is there's a huge focus on benefit and development. How do we harness AI for African Union and Agenda 2063, the SDGs, and these sort of buzzwords, really. So the aspect of control and governance is actually very limited, even if you just simply count the words in those strategies, right? But even on a more practical front, the AU has been pushing for what it calls the African AI Council for a while now. This has just been promissory. It's supposed to have an AI safety task force. Nothing has been done yet. And also last year, I talked about the Global Index earlier today. We track responsible AI commitments across several countries of the world. And what we saw with African countries on AI safety and reliability, so it's just looking at policies in place, is that only about 11 or 41 countries actually have any sort of mechanisms. So mechanisms would be not just policies, but also state initiatives or interventions, right? So sometimes governments don't have hard regulations, which comes back to the question. You might have just a safety institute or some sort of testing or sandboxing process, right? If you consider all of this, right, including civil society activities, only about 1/4 of the countries we measured have anything in place at all. And And on the international front, Kenya is I think is the only African country that's a member of the International Network on AI Safety. So the risk here is automatically the discourse pushes out, or I say, pushes to the margins perspectives from Africa. I think I'll skip to the very final slide because we've talked about a lot of the things on the second slide. One thing I could just quickly touch on. So this paper is by my senior colleague at the Global Center on AI Governance, which I also worked on. If you have a minute, you could just read it. But we kind of map out the AI risk landscape in Africa into three broad areas. Some of you must have seen these terminologies before. The International AI Safety Report uses them, but we try to kind of recategorize them as they affect African communities. One thing I really want to touch on is, and now here comes my argument really, a lot of these issues are not necessarily what you would see as AI safety now, the way AI safety is being discussed, right? So for example, environmental risks would not feature in any discussion on technical AI safety. But this is important. This year alone, NVIDIA has moved from, when you talk about powerful GPUs, the A100s came out late last year into this year, H100s now, H200s now. What's going to happen with all of these GPUs? Eventually, some of them might be repurposed and placed in new data centers. Some of them are going to be just shipped over to Africa or somewhere else, right? And so you see e-waste, there's an advantage obviously to reusability, but the point really is that this places Africa and a lot of the global majority become dumping sites for used or expired technologies, right? I know right now everyone's focusing on energy intensity and water resources, but this is another risk that's coming for us. And so in 2 to 3 years, there'll be so much compute that the rate at which they are being churned out more than they actually needed, right? The one other thing I wanted to touch on is infrastructure dependence. Now, again, this goes back to the sovereignty thing. You're either supplied by the US stack or the Chinese stack. So there's really limited. So back to your question, can any country really be sovereign? I think, quite frankly, at the moment, no. Outside of the US and China, what you could have is leverage. So the EU is doing, I guess, that's what you do with regulation. But a lot of global majority countries actually do not have the leverage to perhaps, or I wouldn't want to say the word shut out, but maybe decouple. Decouple is the right word entirely from US and Chinese supply chain, right? Because it's a very interdependent system. So if you take for example, AI training and modeling, right? So first of all, you need data centers, which if you're talking about the ones that can perform your AI workloads, they are mostly built by the hyperscalers, right? And even if you have the data centers, you need your AI accelerators, your chips. In some ways, everything's controlled mostly by just 7 companies own about 80% of the market, mostly US or Chinese companies. And if you even go a step further to say, well, it's sort of technical skills to operate this, it's very concentrated in certain countries, right? 80% of the world's data centers are in the US, much less in China. So it's a big thing. So can you really talk about sovereignty if you're infrastructurally dependent on these 2 countries? Final slide. I'll try to cover it in 1 minute. So the Global Center on AI Governance, what are we doing? We think, obviously, these risks are the trans-border, especially even on the African continent. A lot of countries have similar arrangements. So if you take infrastructure, for example, right? The reason cloud adoption, for example, is low is, there's a latency problem, but there's also, if you take a country like, Lesotho or Rwanda, right? What's the existing infrastructure capability to be able to actually host cloud services? So in most cases, you would regionally outfit it, right? So maybe you have something in, South Africa or Eastern African community that there's a lot of cooperation, right? And you wouldn't really necessarily bother about your data being at risk. So what we've decided to do at the Global Center on AI Governance, we've launched the African AI Safety Hub, which is hosted at the University of Cape Town. This project is supported by the UK FCDO and Canada's IDRC. And basically, we have three research agenda over the next few years that the hub is going to operate. The first one is research. So we are aiming to develop detection tools, actually misinformation detection tools for African languages, right? A lot of the communication that actually takes place on social media, if you look at Facebook, for example, takes place within contextual nuance, right? So I'm Nigerian, right? So there's certain words that we have the Nigerian English, which is a separate version of English on its own. There's certain words that are used in this context that in the English language, this would probably not be flagged, right? If you ask your content moderators. So you need specialized tools that can actually pick up on this sort of detect misinformation. And we're doing that for 25 plus African languages. The other thing we're doing is capacity strengthening. So we are working with people actually on the ground. A lot of the members of this research group, as you can obviously guess, are from the UCT, but some of them also from the ILINA program in Kenya, which sort of mentors young people to get into AI governance. And the final bit, obviously, is doing some policy influence, aiming to bring together African leaders to discuss safety and security. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, better.
Thank you so much. Very interesting stuff. So one thing that stuck out to me in talking about sovereignty, and you were talking about different stacks and the sort of monopolization of that, and I'm wondering if taking a less resource-intensive approach and a more open source approach is something that you see being explored.
Yep.
In global South countries specifically, around like, okay, so we're not developing the largest language models, but we're using different techniques for doing things more efficiently.
Yeah.
Or we're maybe not even using language models, but we're just using something like WordNet or co-occurrence vectors, or like these simpler, more well-known, and specifically more energy efficient, resource efficient things, because that also opens up using other types of chips, right? You don't need the H200s, but you can get by with a Raspberry Pi or something like a RISC-V based hardware approach. Do you know also if there's hardware development being done on this?
Yeah, no, I agree. So I mean, there's a resource rationale to it, and there's obviously also a political rationale to actually, I mean, I guess like on one hand, like focusing on small language models, right? And the other kind of repurposing existing chips. So two things I'd say. There's actually someone doing some work on this. Unfortunately, they are based in the US, or fortunately, whichever way you want. But what they're trying to do is basically establish something called data terrariums. So basically take used chips and put them in existing traditional data centers, just to train models, for model-specific function, right? So if you want to do AI for health, right? Because if you're trying to build one model for everything, so you need more data centralization and processing, which obviously drives this, increase for data centers. So there's a resource argument for it, but there's also a political rationale, which is that policymakers want quick wins, right? So a few weeks ago, the Nigerian minister was in Oxford to give a talk, and everyone just kept firing at him. Well, why? I mean, there's a push for African countries to be sovereign and build their own, digital infrastructure, right? But there's a feasibility point here, which is that how long is it going to take for you to catch up, right? To build, where do you want to start from, right? It's not a loser mentality. I'm not giving up, but it's a long-term thing. So you need a kind of middle strategy there. And his strategy was, well, we'll focus on adoption, right? There's a lot you could do with small language models, and I think Frank, we're talking in the afternoon. A lot of the use cases in Africa actually come from like civic tech, embedded in development use cases. So there's really, there are people working on like, generic models or one model for everything, but most of them are kind of focused on specific use cases. So that drives, I guess, it's a good thing. I suppose that's my answer. In the long term, though, the challenge is it just creates more infrastructure dependence, right? Every time people talk about AI development in Africa, we are thinking of, fine-tuning Llama or GPT-4 or something, right? At what point would people start to build their own models? There's some work going on this actually. There's a Nigerian company doing, just actually building its own model from scratch, but it's a really long haul, hard job.
Okay, I saw the hand there, but I actually want to give Carolina the floor to react to what's been said before, and maybe tell a little bit about sovereignty as well.
Thank you. I think I've just shared on the chat something that might be relevant for the audience. Oh, sorry, I forgot to. Yeah. I'm sharing a regional report. It was released last month, and I'm sharing my screen here just to sort of bring in some of these ideas around sovereignty and AI safety and governance, and what does it mean when we are talking about the lack of compute power. And these are some of the kind of the regional indicators that we can see in the region and how far we are from that reality. So can we actually sort of garner sovereignty when there is not control of the whole AI infrastructure stack? And I would say, and this is where we get into the real flux of your initial question, Frank, around whether we can compare AI sovereignty with other industries. And particularly for global majority contexts and in Latin America, I mean, there are some implications about sovereignty in AI concerning extractivism and the extraction of data. So we are producers of large data volumes, which make some of the assumptions around the scarcity of data a myth for the development of AI systems. But what we do lack is not only compute power and infrastructure, as you can see here, but what we do lack is also human capability. We lack resources and financial resources to have more AI specialists working to address our own data concerns and our own data resources, which are huge. And here I want to bring in some research that I've been doing lately with colleagues in Groningen University and Edmilson Paranat Lund University in Finland, concerning the narrative around the synthetic data in the financial sector. And the financial sector is particularly relevant in Latin America because of the whole thing of the financial inclusion debate. And what does it mean, particularly after COVID-19, to access certain services and etc. So what we see in the region is that there's these narratives around scarcity and the dearth of data resources, of compute power. And as we have seen from many of these examples and questions posed before, there is this possibility and there is this avenue where scholars and policymakers are looking at sovereignty being addressed concretely in some policy outcomes that are addressing the use of open source models, as the previous question was looking at, the questioning of large language models and foundation models that are not developed in the region, or that rely on big tech's capabilities. And in that respect, there is a lot of effort, regional cooperation effort, particularly between Brazil and Chile, which are the two countries with the largest compute power and scientific prowess to address this, developing our own LATAM GPT, which is still in infancy stages, and it does rely on some cloud infrastructure from Amazon Web Services. So I have to say that as well. So when we begin to address sovereignty, what we look at is looking at how countries in the region, or the debates in the region, are focusing on the different layers of this problem: compute power on the one hand, data access on the other, data work on the other, human capabilities, and this is one of the ideas around sovereignty that I wanted to bring. So many of the largest countries with a more forceful approach to sovereignty, and here I'm talking specifically about Brazil and how it is introducing sovereignty, not just in its AI bill, but also in its other platform bills, which, as you are aware, last year there was this this ban on X in Brazil that operated for more than a month and a half, and what does it mean to sort of exercise sovereignty over big tech and large platforms and these kinds of infrastructure. So AI sovereignty is compounded in the case of Brazil in particular, but we are also even seeing this in Chile and Uruguay in terms of how this is compounded with other approaches to big platforms and large and big tech regulation and antitrust measures. Secondly, I really like this idea of distinguishing safety and security, because how is safety understood for a policymaker when AI safety as a vector for AI governance should be introduced? Through two ways, I would say, in Latin America. Firstly, AI standards, and this was mentioned as a comment initially in one of the reactions by one of the first participants in the room. So standards is a language that regulators in the region do understand, and I do think that it is a vector again to understand how AI safety can be materialized in the application of these infrastructures. But secondly, safety and security, as Ayatollah was commenting previously, though they are different, it is very much understood as an existential threat to the livelihood of critical infrastructure in the region more broadly. So through the cyber domain, security and is being kind of more involved or interested in the discussion around AI safety as well. And again, AI safety, and I want to make this clear, AI safety is being approached in platform regulation, but through other mechanisms, not about AI, but about the platforms and the content that is delivered, and maybe addressing this more pragmatic approach that Ed was mentioning in his first bit of intervention on how these platforms are being used and taken by users in our specific region. So yeah, I've been trying to sort of pick up a little bit of the different threads of the conversation over the last half an hour to address this picture of safety and sovereignty in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I pick up on your questions? There are things in the chat as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So, my comment and question touch upon of everything like the speaker has talked. So, continuing on this need to differentiate some concepts like AI safety or what's the security agenda, I was wondering how the speakers see the difference and what's important to see as difference of the concept of AI safety and AI governance, maybe as something broader. And more specifically, what's the role of, researchers like us on trying to bring more convergence to these concepts, and particularly AI safety? I mean, I think it was very clear in all the speeches how it's a topic that first has being captured always by like some specific government's interest, and then it can change agenda just by changing governments. I mean, we saw that with the UK and the US, how from one day to the other is now a security institute, it's not safety anymore, and national security becomes this big role. But we also see this industry interest that are always focusing on this catastrophic existential risk, and not saying that they are not important, but there are other things happening right now that we should be looking. So for me, it's very clear, and I will stop here, that these governments are not doing enough to try to find the convergency, because in the end, maybe it's more interesting to have this flexibility of changing whatever is safety as something more important for my own reality, my own government. So what could be done for trying to find a more global convergence on the topic?
I see that my role gets more and more difficult because you don't see it, but I see that lunch is getting ready there. So we're getting there, 10 minutes more. And so I would like, if people from the panel want to answer this quickly, because we also have questions from the chat that I want to give some chance as well.
Does anyone want to go? Maybe Ed?
Yeah, happy to take a step as well. And that's also related to the last question raised by the audience in the room. I think one elephant in the room that we haven't really touched on, especially in the context of no matter middle power or global majority context, is the knowledge gap, especially for governments and also for the civil society organization. I mean, we are commissioned by the Interparliamentarian Union to deliver a 3 hours AI governance training for about 100 to 150 MPs from around the world. And the topic is building national capacity. And we have spent quite a lot of our portion talking about, oh, how should government think about this kind of infrastructure, this kind of stack conversation. But very often missing is on the capacity building side. Even if capacity building is being raised in such conversation, usually the context is around AI adoption. So how can we train more AI developer to support the development of such industry in a particular government? But rarely it was raised in the context of, oh, do we also want to allocate some more resources in terms of capacity building for AI policy or AI governance talent in the government role, so that when they think about all these questions that we have raised, at least they would have a basic understanding in terms of how does AI work from a very simple technical angle, and also what are some of these potential benefits and also risks of the technology, and also what are some of these experiments out there. I mean, this topic is so new. Different governments, they're trying their best to come up with some sort of experiments, no matter whether you're looking at the EU, US, China, Singapore. So at least when the policymakers, for example, in Indonesia, which we just conducted a training on, at least they can have a baseline understanding of what are some of these experiments in different major countries and what are the pros and cons of each of the approach. Same thing on the CSO side, we touch on the multiple, the whole spectrum of risk, right? No matter whether you're focusing on the current societal risk or some of these near longer term potential catastrophic or frontier risks. How do we bring this CSO into the conversation? We have been running training for human rights and digital rights organization. If you talk to them on this particular issue, the risk of AI on human rights, no matter whether you're asking them now or 10 years ago, they will probably give you the same answer, largely focusing on the societal risk. But with the capability of the AI model increasing so dramatically in the past few years in multiple factors, how do we bring these human rights, digital rights, other CSO into this conversation by bringing them up to speed on some of these latest developments? That's a very crucial part as well.
Thanks. I just want to give the chat people.
Online participant, Ermelinda, but perhaps she can speak up, or otherwise I will read it out. Ermelinda?
Sure, I can also have the question myself. So the question is directed to the person in the panel. So we heard a lot about sovereignty, but we also understand that sovereignty is a really contested concept, that it is interpreted differently depending on the region, political context and so on. And my question would be, like, do you equate digital sovereignty primarily with control over infrastructure, or does it also include governance, data, and values? Edward also mentioned that in the UK there is a different understanding of what digital sovereignty is. And the second question, maybe as a follow-up, but it's up to you. How do you view the idea of digital colonialism? There is also a lot of talks about it in the literature nowadays, and I want to understand especially your ideas about the fact that if you see the current digital global digital power dynamic as a new form of dependency or domination in the digital age.
Yep, I guess that question is...
I'll give you 2 minutes,
okay,
because then we can round up.
I'll try to make it happen. So, yeah, that's true. Different regions actually have, well, maybe not different regions. I mean, different countries is a better way to put it, actually have different perspectives of what sovereignty is. There's some convergence, which is that I haven't seen any country really say, well, we don't really care about controlling our infrastructure, right? So there are some basic elements. Everyone wants to be in charge of their infrastructure, right? But it's not just infrastructure, obviously. It's also the the data and the systems that underpin it, and as well like governance, like you're saying, right? I think they are inseparable. Like everything is sort of one thing in my mind. So, for example, why do countries want physical territoriality of data centers, right? One of it is protecting sensitive data, right? So, I mean, your data is classified before it goes on the cloud. There's certain types of data you don't want to go outside of your borders, right? But there are also sort of emergency reasons, right? Emergency switch or like, uptime or those kind of stuff. So I think, yes, countries have different conceptions. There's a baseline, right? Now, coming to the UK, truly, it's kind of articulated, the UK has articulated a strong, policy-wise, you see digital sovereignty littered everywhere, right? In reality, that's not the case. A lot of it, for example, if you take cloud, right? It's been dominated by AWS and Microsoft in the last 5 years. More so AWS, there's a paper out that looks at purchase of cloud services in the NHS and how it's sort of spiked up. But again, I think the argument I'm making isn't so much about the normative views of countries, but what are you actually able to do practically, right? So you can say, well, we want to build a British stack, right? In reality, that takes long, right? And it depends on what you're talking about. You're not just going to say, oh, well, British Arm, then you're going to build cloud, you're going to do semiconductors, you're going to do everything, right? So countries tend to edge between what's feasible and the long-term goal. But I think you're correct in that it's not just about control of infrastructure. It's also about values and alignment. What's the second question? Sorry.
I think we have to.
Okay.
About digital colonialism.
Yeah, that's obviously very, 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 very much so. I mean, countries have very limited choices, right? In terms of, again, I'm an academic, so it's very hard to separate like reading papers from this. There's a paper out by a professor at used to be at Oxford, now he's at Otto University, who looked at which suppliers do countries rely on. And if you look at the majority of countries that were scoped, basically data centers and cloud services, mostly rely on either of the US or China. Now that's a dangerous level of dependency. Now there's one thing to rely on both, or like US, China, and the EU. There's one thing to just have everything supplied by one, like companies originating from one country. So any single policy like the US Cloud Act could just, put you at risk, which is what's happening in Rwanda right now, right? They can't really do anything on cloud because of US Cloud Act restrictions and their own skepticism towards it. Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to finish off with one remark myself about colonialism. I think it's not just towards countries like Africa or Latin America. We get colonialized as much here in Europe, not by the infrastructure, but by the ID. Everyone is running after this one ID. So LLMs are AI is LLMs, LLMs are AI, and we have to do that. And that actually creates a dependency on the states, on the big tech, in a way that I think that's a big danger as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can probably talk about all of this during the lunch, which I see is ready there. I would like to thank the panel for being here. Also, the people online, thanks a lot for your patience being there 1.5 hours online.